What happens when charisma turns into control, when music turns into madness, and when blind devotion turns into bloodshed? The story you're about to hear isn't just a crime. It's a nightmare that shattered an entire generation's sense of safety. This is the night the world saw how far manipulation, fear, and fanaticism could go. The Manson family murders weren't just about death. They were about power, control, and the terrifying truth that evil can hide behind a smile. Charles Manson was not just another criminal who stumbled into the spotlight of history. He was a man who carefully crafted an image of himself as a prophet, a visionary, and a leader who convinced vulnerable young people that he held the answers to life's deepest questions. His twisted worldview was wrapped in charisma and manipulation, and at its core was an apocalyptic prophecy he called Helter Skelter. Inspired by his distorted interpretation of songs from the Beatles, especially the track Helter Skelter, Manson told his followers that the world was on the brink of a massive race war. He insisted that the social and political unrest of the 1960s was only the beginning of a violent revolution that would engulf the United States. He claimed that Black Americans would rise up, overthrow the system, and kill off the wealthy and privileged. Yet in Manson's vision, they would not be able to govern afterward, and it would then fall to him and his loyal family to take over, emerging from hiding as the ultimate leaders of the New World Order. This narrative was not grounded in reality, but for those drawn to Manson, it sounded like divine truth. He used fear, music, drugs, and psychological control to plant his prophecy deep into the minds of his followers. Manson convinced them that every act they carried out was not only for survival, but also part of fulfilling a larger cosmic plan. In his mind, Helter Skelter was not just a theory. It was inevitable, and he would be at the center of it. What makes his manipulation even more disturbing is how effectively he wove together popular culture, biblical references, and countercultural ideals into a philosophy that his family believed without question. The rise of the family began in the late 1960s, a time when America was in turmoil. The Vietnam War, civil rights protests, and political assassinations had created a culture of instability and distrust. Manson, a man with a long criminal record and time spent in prison, saw opportunity in this chaos. When he was released in 1967, he drifted into the heart of San Francisco's counterculture scene. The summer of love was in full swing, and young people from across the country were flocking to California in search of freedom, peace, and a sense of belonging. Many were disillusioned with mainstream society, desperate for guidance, and hungry for something or someone to give their lives meaning. Manson offered himself as that answer. With his guitar, his hypnotic stare, and his ability to read people's vulnerabilities, he began to attract followers, particularly young women. He promised them love, freedom, and a sense of family they never had before. He positioned himself as both a father figure and a spiritual guide, telling them they were chosen to play a role in a world-changing prophecy. Drugs like LSD were frequently used to break down defenses, and Manson would use these experiences to reinforce his authority. While his followers tripped, he would preach about destiny, the apocalypse, and the role they would play in reshaping the world. Over time, these sessions solidified their devotion to him. The family was not just a group of drifters. It became a tightly controlled community under Manson's rule. They lived together, often in isolated places like the Spahn Ranch in California, where Manson's word became law. He stripped his followers of their individual identities, often giving them new names and cutting them off from their families and former lives. Possessions were shared, hierarchies were enforced, and absolute loyalty was expected. What Manson gave in return was a warped sense of purpose. They were the chosen ones who would survive the chaos of the coming Helter Skelter and lead the world afterward. Manson was obsessed with symbols and messages he believed were hidden in music and scripture. He claimed that the Beatles were sending him personal messages through their songs, guiding him to his destiny. He pointed to lyrics as proof that his vision of the future was real, convincing his followers that the revolution was not just near, it was about to explode. This blending of pop culture with prophecy made his teaching seem urgent, relevant, and undeniable to his impressionable followers. As his grip on the family tightened, Manson began testing their loyalty with increasingly criminal acts. Theft, intimidation, and minor assaults escalated into rehearsals for something far darker. He told them that in order to survive the coming chaos, they had to be willing to kill, to shed blood without hesitation. By convincing them that violence was not just necessary but sacred, he eliminated their moral barriers. What began as a group bonded by promises of love and freedom transformed into a cult willing to commit horrific crimes in his name. The power of Manson's control was not simply in what he promised, but in how he made his followers feel. Many of them were young, lost, and searching for connection. He filled that void with belonging, then twisted it into dependency. They did not see themselves as murderers in training. They saw themselves as soldiers of destiny, chosen to carry out the will of a man who claimed to be more than human. To question him was to risk being cast out, losing the only family they believed they had. Through this manipulation, Manson built a following that blurred the line between devotion and delusion. They believed they were living at the edge of history, about to play their part in an event that would change the world forever. And with every sermon, every drug-fueled session, every promise of power in the aftermath of chaos, the family became more willing to do whatever Manson commanded. What began as the dream of love and belonging under the California sun turned into a nightmare that would shake the nation to its core. On the night of August 8, 1969, an eerie silence covered the Benedict Canyon neighborhood in Los Angeles. Hidden beneath that quiet was the storm about to break, a night that would forever be remembered for its horror. At the center of this storm were 4 members of Charles Manson's family: Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian. Manson had sent them with chilling instructions. Go to the home at 150 Cielo Drive, the residence of Roman Polanski and his wife Sharon Tate, and kill everyone inside. Manson's orders were not vague, not open for interpretation. They were specific, brutal, and carried with them the twisted promise of igniting his helter-skelter prophecy. The house they approached belonged to Sharon Tate, a young actress and model whose star was rising in Hollywood. She was 8 months pregnant with her first child, and her husband, Roman Polanski, was away in Europe working on a film. That night, Tate had invited friends over to keep her company: celebrity hairstylist Jay Sebring, coffee heiress Abigail Folger, and Polish writer Wojciech Frykowski. None of them had any idea that they were about to face unimaginable violence. Just after midnight, the Manson family car pulled up near the driveway. The killers, dressed in dark clothing, carried knives, a gun, and rope. Their mission was clear, but their first victim was not inside the house. It was a young man who had nothing to do with Tate or her friends. His name was Stephen Parent, an 18-year-old who had stopped by to visit the caretaker, William Garrettson, who lived in a guest house on the property. Parent was on his way out, driving his car toward the gates, when Tex Watson approached him. In an instant, the mission turned bloody. Tex pointed a revolver at Parent, who begged for his life, telling him he wouldn't say anything if they let him go. But there was no mercy. Parent was shot multiple times through the window of his car, his cries silenced in seconds. He had become the first victim of a massacre that would leave the world stunned. After killing Parent, the group cut the phone lines to the property, making sure no one could call for help. Then they climbed up the slope to the main house. The lights glowed inside, laughter and conversation drifting into the night, but within minutes that peace would be shattered. Tex led the way, slipping through a window to unlock the front door for the others. Once inside, the killers moved quickly, their weapons ready, their minds fueled by the hypnotic orders of Manson. The first to encounter them was Wojciech Frykowski, who had been asleep on the living room couch. Awakened by the noise, he asked Tex who they were and what they wanted. Tex's response was cold, mechanical. "I'm the devil, and I'm here to do the devil's business." With those words, the nightmare truly began. Frykowski tried to fight, but he was quickly overpowered. Susan Atkins pinned him down while Tex beat and stabbed him with shocking brutality. In another part of the house, Abigail Folger was dragged from her room. She screamed and struggled, but Patricia Krenwinkel chased her down. Despite Folger's desperate attempts to flee through the yard, she was stabbed repeatedly until she collapsed. Jay Sebring, who had been with Sharon Tate in her bedroom, tried to shield her from harm. He was shot and stabbed, his body crumpling near the pregnant actress he was trying to protect. Sharon Tate herself was the last to face the killers. Terrified, she pleaded with them to spare her unborn child, begging them to take her hostage instead of killing her. But her pleas fell on deaf ears. Susan Atkins and Tex Watson attacked her viciously, stabbing her until both she and her baby were dead. The scene inside the house was one of unimaginable horror. Blood spattered across walls and furniture, bodies scattered across rooms and the lawn, and the sound of screams fading into silence. When the killers finally left, they smeared the word pig in Sharon Tate's blood on the front door, a grotesque calling card meant to link the crime to Manson's vision of helter-skelter. Their goal was not just to kill, but to terrorize, to make the murder so shocking and senseless that they would ignite the chaos Manson had promised was coming. Meanwhile, back in the guest house, caretaker William Garretson remained unharmed. He later told investigators that he heard strange noises, but he never stepped outside. It was only the next morning, when the bodies were discovered, that the full extent of the carnage came to light. The brutal murder of Stephen Parent, the senseless slaughter of Abigail Folger, Wojciech Frykowski, Jay Sebring, and the tragic killing of Sharon Tate and her unborn child sent shockwaves through Los Angeles and the entire nation. The randomness of Stephen Parent's death underscored the horror of the crimes. He was simply at the wrong place at the wrong time, a teenager who had no connection to Manson or his twisted vision. His murder symbolized the indiscriminate nature of the family's violence. No one was safe. No life was too innocent to be spared. The Tate house, once a symbol of Hollywood glamour, became a scene of unspeakable terror. Neighbors awoke the next day to sirens and police cars, unaware that one of the most notorious crimes in American history had unfolded right next door. For weeks, fear gripped the city. Rumors of satanic cults, drug-related feuds, and random maniacs spread like wildfire. People who once left their doors unlocked now armed themselves, barricading their homes in fear that they might be next. What happened that night at 150 Cielo Drive was not only a horrific crime, but a turning point in American culture. It shattered the innocence of the late 1960s, ending an era of free love and optimism with a brutal reminder of how easily ideals could be twisted into violence. The murders were carried out with cold precision, but their impact went far beyond the victims. They left a scar on society, a symbol of how manipulation and blind devotion could lead to pure evil. On the night of August 8th, 1969, chaos erupted inside the secluded home of actress Sharon Tate, where a nightmare unfolded that would forever stain the pages of American history. Inside the residence were Sharon Tate, 8.5 months pregnant and radiant with the anticipation of motherhood, hairstylist Jay Sebring, coffee heiress Abigail Folger, and aspiring screenwriter Wojciech Frykowski. None of them could have imagined that death was already at their doorstep, carried in by young followers of Charles Manson, who believed they were serving some twisted purpose under his command. Their mission was not only to kill, but to do so with a cruelty that would send shockwaves through society. These murders were not random. They were carefully chosen by Manson to ignite terror, to symbolize his delusional vision of revolution, and to leave a grotesque calling card of fear. As the killers stormed into the home, panic and resistance broke out almost instantly. Stephen Parent, a young visitor to the property who had been leaving after seeing the caretaker, had already been shot dead in his car at the driveway. This chilling prelude was only the beginning. Inside, the family members launched their brutal attack with knives and a .22 caliber revolver. Jay Sebring, close friend of Sharon Tate, tried to protect her but was quickly overpowered and shot, then stabbed repeatedly. Sharon, who pleaded desperately for the life of her unborn child, was forced to witness unimaginable violence. The attackers showed no mercy, cutting through their victims with a frenzy that went beyond murder. It was an act meant to terrify, to dehumanize, to make a statement that bloodshed was now their language. Abigail Folger attempted to escape the carnage, running out of the house into the darkness of the yard, but she was chased down, stabbed dozens of times until her screams fell silent. Wojciech Frykowski fought fiercely against the intruders, but despite his desperate attempt to resist, he too was shot and stabbed relentlessly, his body collapsing under the overwhelming brutality. Sharon Tate, left alive the longest, continued to beg for the safety of her unborn baby, but in the end, her pleas fell on deaf ears. She was stabbed multiple times in a savage frenzy that took both her life and the life of the child she carried. When the slaughter ended, the house was no longer a home. It was a scene drenched in horror. The walls echoed with the silence of death, but the killers were not finished. They left behind not just broken bodies, but also a message designed to spread fear beyond the crime scene itself. On the front door of Sharon Tate's home, in a grotesque act of psychological warfare, they used the victim's blood to smear the word pig. This single word was far more than random vandalism. It was a deliberate calling card, a symbol of Charles Manson's warped ideology. To him, this was a spark meant to ignite chaos in America, to fuel racial tensions, and to paint a narrative of class warfare. For the public, however, it was an incomprehensible act of cruelty, a haunting reminder that safety could be shattered at any moment. The image of the word pig written in blood became one of the most infamous details of the Tate murders. It was chilling in its simplicity, yet overwhelming in its implication. It suggested not only violence, but a deeper message, a sign that the killings were part of something bigger, something orchestrated, something far more dangerous than random homicide. This grotesque writing on the wall turned the murders into more than a crime. It made them a spectacle of fear. It told the world that Manson and his followers wanted recognition, that they craved terror as their weapon. The idea that someone could not only kill but also desecrate a home with the blood of its victims was almost too much for society to comprehend. The brutality of these murders shattered Hollywood's sense of security. The glamorous world of celebrities, once perceived as untouchable, was pierced with the reminder that even fame, wealth, or beauty could not protect against evil when it came knocking. Sharon Tate, a rising star with a bright future, and her unborn child symbolized innocence and promise, making her death all the more tragic. The sheer randomness of the crime, killing people who had no connection to Manson beyond circumstance, added to the atmosphere of terror. Anyone could be a target. Any home could become a battleground. News of the killing spread like wildfire, gripping headlines and flooding every household with fear. The brutality of the stabbings, the high-profile victims, and the eerie blood-written message shocked the nation. This was not just another crime story. It was a cultural earthquake. It represented a turning point where innocence was lost, where America began to see that evil could lurk not in distant shadows but right in its backyard. Families locked their doors tighter, neighborhoods grew wary of strangers, and the sense of safety people once felt in their own homes was stripped away. The word written in blood was not only the killer's message to society, but it also became an emblem of the madness behind Charles Manson's apocalyptic philosophy. He wanted chaos, confusion, and fear to take root, and through the Tate murders, his dark vision had reached the public stage. That single word on the door carried with it the heavy weight of a man's delusion imposed on innocent lives, a grim reminder of how far fanaticism can drive human beings when guided by evil. The Tate residence was no longer just a home, it became a symbol of horror, and the word pig, etched in blood, would forever remain one of the most haunting images in the history of American crime. The night after the Tate murders, the so-called family was not finished. Charles Manson, dissatisfied with how his followers had carried out his vision, decided to take a more direct role in choosing the next victims. On August 10, 1969, he led members of his group on another mission, one that would further cement the terror he sought to unleash on society. This time, their target was the home of Lino and Rosemary LaBianca, a wealthy couple living in Los Angeles. Unlike the Tate residence, which had been selected partly at random, the LaBianca house was chosen specifically by Manson, who wanted to make sure the message of chaos and brutality was unmistakable. Once again, the night descended into an orgy of violence that bore all the hallmarks of his delusional prophecy. Manson accompanied his followers to the LaBianca residence, scoping out the property and even entering the house first to tie up the couple. His control over his followers was absolute. He did not have to strike the blows himself. He only had to command, and they obeyed. After ensuring his victims were secured, Manson left the actual murders to his disciples, returning to the car as if detached from the bloody acts about to occur. Inside, the couple pleaded for their lives, but their fate had already been sealed by Manson's twisted design. Lino LaBianca, a supermarket executive, was bound and brutally attacked, stabbed multiple times with a knife and even a carving fork, which was left protruding grotesquely from his stomach. His wife Rosemary suffered a similar fate, stabbed dozens of times as the killers carried out their leader's command with robotic loyalty. The brutality of the LaBianca murders mirrored the savagery of the Tate killings. But there was an even deeper emphasis on symbolism and messages. After the couple lay dead, the killers used their blood to scrawl words on the walls. Death to pigs, rise, and most chillingly, helter skelter, a misspelled version of Manson's apocalyptic prophecy inspired by the Beatles' song. The words written across the LaBianca home were not just acts of desecration, they were Manson's attempt to frame his fantasy as reality, to create the illusion of a coming race war that he claimed would plunge the country into chaos. By planting these messages, he hoped to incite fear, confusion, and division, believing society would unravel in the wake of such gruesome spectacles. The sheer savagery and strangeness of the crimes gripped the nation. For the police and investigators, the LaBianca murders initially seemed disconnected from the Tate slayings, but the similarities in method and the eerie blood-written messages soon revealed a chilling pattern. 2 nights, 2 homes, and 7 innocent lives had been taken, all linked by the invisible hand of Charles Manson's manipulative influence. The fear these crimes generated spread far beyond Los Angeles. Families across the United States watched in horror as newspapers and television broadcasts detailed the killings, turning the Manson family into a household name synonymous with terror. The arrest of Manson and his followers later that year pulled back the curtain on the cult-like dynamics that had fueled such savagery. The image of young, seemingly ordinary women smiling and singing as they entered the courtroom contrasted horrifyingly with the brutality of their crimes. Their blind devotion to Manson, their willingness to commit atrocities in his name, stunned the public and raised questions about the nature of control, manipulation, and evil. Manson himself, though never directly killing the victims, wielded a psychological power that made him equally, if not more, terrifying. He had transformed a group of young drifters and runaways into instruments of his madness, convincing them that murder was justified, even necessary, for the dawn of a new world. The trial became one of the most sensational in American history, not only for the crimes, but also for the bizarre behavior displayed by the defendants. Manson carved an X into his forehead, later shaping it into a swastika, and his followers mimicked his every move. They laughed, sang, and even threatened witnesses, turning the courtroom into a stage for their cult's dark theater. Their demeanor revealed the depth of Manson's influence and the extent to which their minds had been warped by his apocalyptic vision. For the jury and the public, it became clear that these were not ordinary criminals. They were the embodiment of fanaticism, a reminder of how dangerous blind obedience to a deranged leader could be. The sentences handed down reflected the gravity of the crimes. Manson and several of his followers were convicted and originally sentenced to death, a punishment that was later commuted to life imprisonment when California abolished the death penalty. Though they would live out their lives behind bars, the shadow of their crimes never faded. Each name, Manson, Tate, LaBianca, remained etched into the national consciousness. The story of the family was retold in books, documentaries, and films, not as a sensational tale alone, but as a cautionary reminder of the extremes of human behavior. What made the case so horrifying was not only the brutality of the murders, but also the apparent normalcy of the killers before they fell under Manson's sway. They were not monsters in appearance. They were young, smiling, and to many, disarmingly ordinary. That contrast made the crimes all the more unsettling. It showed that evil does not always come with a recognizable face. It can hide behind charm, music, and the illusion of belonging. Charles Manson's manipulation exploited vulnerabilities in his followers, twisting their desire for meaning into acts of pure terror. The LaBianca murders and the subsequent trial stripped away any lingering innocence in American culture at the time. It was the end of the 1960s, a decade marked by hope, freedom, and dreams of change. But the Manson family crimes became a dark exclamation point on that era. They revealed the shadows lurking beneath the ideals of peace and love, proving that utopian dreams could be corrupted into nightmares when placed in the hands of a man like Manson. The murders were not only a tragedy for the victims and their families, but also a wound on the nation itself, one that reminded everyone of how fragile safety and trust could be. The Tate LaBianca murders weren't random acts of violence. They were the chilling result of one man's delusion and the blind loyalty of those who followed him. From the twisted prophecy of helter-skelter to the cult-like control Charles Manson held, to the horrific slaughter inside Sharon Tate's home and the LaBianca residence, every detail revealed the dangerous combination of manipulation and madness. The nation saw the word pig written in blood, and with it, innocence was lost. The courtroom drama, the smiling disciples, the swastika carved into Manson's forehead, all of it became symbols of a generation's darkest nightmare. And while Manson and his followers were locked away, the echo of their crimes never truly faded. It remains a reminder of how easily the promise of love and freedom can be twisted into terror when guided by a voice of evil. This story is not just about murder. It's about the fragility of trust, the dangers of blind faith, and the importance of guarding the mind and soul from the poison of manipulation. Evil thrives when good people stay unaware. Learn the lesson, carry the warning, and never forget. Darkness can wear a friendly face. Stay awake, stay strong, stay aware.